Whitetails and Agronomy with Wes Steele from DIY Food Plot Pro. Wes has over 25 years experience in commercial ag production, food plots, a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy, and owns and operates a deer hunting outfitter business in western Kentucky. Follow along as Wes discusses proven food plot strategies, habitat enhancements, and how to manage a deer herd to produce higher quality bucks on your farm.
Welcome everybody to episode 6 of Whitetails and Agronomy. I'm your host Wes Steele. This show we're going to talk about no-till versus conventional tillage. We're going to talk about a fall food plot that is getting a lot of attention from summer food plotters. We are going to share some consulting client success stories, and we're also going to answer some questions that were submitted. So one of my consulting clients from last year reached out this morning, and I thought this story is worth sharing. It's pretty interesting, I think. So this guy was a really big businessman, really good at what he did. And so basically what happened is he has just got into hunting, and so he called me this past winter and said, hey, I want to set up a time. I want you to come to the farm and teach me, the ins and outs of deer hunting and how to set this farm up the best way that's possible. So why I thought that was interesting was because most of the time when folks call me, they have some experience behind them. So they've hunted for several years and they want a fresh set of eyes, right? Because we all kind of start getting into a pattern when we hunt and we think, okay, this is what we have always done and had success with. We might miss some opportunities because we're kind of glued to these areas and stuck in these areas that we've always hunted. So that's generally what I get. I also get a lot of guys that have just bought a farm and they want me to come out and look at it. But generally those guys are guys that have hunted before. This guy was brand new to hunting. So kind of unique in that aspect of it. So when I got out there to that part of the country, I did 2 consultations that week. Did one about an hour away, then I drove the next day and did his. And it was very unique when I got there because he was basically telling me, he's like, the way that I see this and the way that I've always seen business is I can sit here and hunt and try to learn food plotting and try to learn how to set all this stuff up. And it may take 3, 4, 5 years before I really grasp the ideas and get this thing set up how it needs to be. Or I can call somebody in and get this thing set up immediately and start hunting immediately. So it's really kind of eye-opening to think somebody thinks like that. It's really pretty ingenious, to be honest, to have that to, instead of trying to beat the curve and do the learning curve, he just decided, well, you know what, we're just going to completely scrap that. We're going to beat the learning curve altogether, and I'm going to get somebody on my side that knows food plotting, that knows deer hunting, and we're going to go on with this, and we're going to make this learning curve much, much faster. So he called today or sent me a message today of some of his food plots, and they were absolutely fantastic looking. So when we set this property up, it was a smaller property. I wanted some soybeans on this property, and I also wanted some clover. And then we also have a third food plot, which is going to be more of a fall food plot mix with brassicas and some cereal grains. And we were also going to interseed some cereal grains into the standing beans as well. So we're going to have quite a bit of food on this farm that's never had any food on it before, mainly just fallow fields that were being bush hogged maybe once or twice a year. Very little in the way of whitetails using this property. So when I told him to plant the soybeans, I said, you're going to have to protect them. Even though he's not in a super high density area, not a ton of agriculture where he's at, I would consider it probably a medium density zone. And I told him, you're definitely going to need to protect this because we're just planting maybe 1 to 1.5 acres here. The deer are going to wipe this out if you don't protect it. So he bought an air crow that I recommended, and he put it out right as the soybeans were coming up. And long story short, he has got a beautiful stand of beans that are a little over knee high. I mean, they're just doing absolutely phenomenal. And so I was very proud of what he's done, and he's very proud of what he's done. And to kind of bring this message home a little bit, when he first started on these food plots and making his land the very best it can be, you're talking tractors and planters or drills. It's quite a bit of equipment that's needed for this location. And so as we were talking about this, and we had gone over his goals and objectives before I made the plan, and he was fine with, getting a drill or a planter, whatever he needed to be able to make that property better. And so many times through this spring, me and him were on the phone talking or over text message and talking, hey, what can I do here? What can I spray here? It's really something that I take a lot of pride in as a consultant. I'm not just going to a property and making a plan for that property and then never talking to that landowner again. It's very odd that that happens. It's very rare. 99% of my clients I talk to very, very regularly. They are still in contact with me. Hey, what do you think here? What should I spray here? And still we're constantly working together, even though maybe the visit was 2 or 3 years ago. So it's very important to me to have that communication with those landowners and to continue communication with those landowners. And it's not just a one time and I'm done and I'm never going to talk to Wes again. It's I got Wes on my side and I got Wes in my corner for as long as I need it. So I take a lot of pride in that guy. And the soybeans plots that he had planted are getting absolutely hammered. The clover plots that he planted are getting absolutely hammered. So a lot of good things happening. Now, a few minutes ago, I got a text message from another consulting client. He had a field of soybeans that he had prepared, and boy, they were looking amazing as well. So a lot of success stories today really makes you feel good and makes you feel like you're making a difference in people's lives. And that's what I'm hoping to do by doing the consulting is I'm trying to help people and try to teach them how to do these things and they don't have to struggle like I did. Because when I first started, there's no telling how many plots that I raised that failed. And a lot of us are like that if we're being honest. It just takes time to learn the trade. It takes time to learn the chemicals and to learn the herbicides and to learn what pests to look out for. And there's a lot of pitfalls in food plotting. So I'm very happy that those two clients have had the success that they've had. And I'm sure there's multiple others that are out there as well. So a little bit of what we've been doing this week. We still above average temperatures and rainfall for our area. Corn is growing absolutely crazy. It's over my head high right now. The soybeans are around knee high. So are the cowpeas and the lab. So everything's doing really, really well. Some of the corn varieties are getting absolutely hammered by deer right now. Absolutely unbelievable. I went out and shot some videos on Friday. And it was unbelievable the amount of deer damage that I saw out there in those corn food plots that are in there with the soybeans and the lab and the cowpeas. So, I mean, these whitetails are 100% keying in on some of this corn. And we have a question about this earlier, so I'm not going to hit that too hard right now. I sent off 8 different plant samples last week. Everything that's in the plot trials I sent off to the university to get analysis done for a feed ration. So what that's going to tell me is what's the protein, what's the digestibility, what's the phosphorus, what are all the other nutrients that are in that plant, what are they up to right now. That's very important to me because I want to understand why these whitetails are keying in on certain food plots that they are right now. And so if you haven't already, you should absolutely go to my YouTube channel, DIY Food Plot Pro, because in the next hopefully week to 10 days I'm going to release a video on there that's going to be talking about these analysis that I get back. I think it's going to be very eye-opening, and I hope that we can tell a lot about why these whitetails are eating what they're eating right now, and maybe some of the others why they're not eating them. So I think that's going to be a very interesting episode. I'm going to try to push that out as soon as I get those analysis back. Thank you so much for everyone that submitted a question or questions last week. It really helps me produce this podcast and the YouTube channel, so I really appreciate that. Please keep them coming. If you have a question or questions that you would like answered, talked about on the podcast or YouTube channel, please send those questions to DIYFoodPlotPro@outlook.com. Thank you again for doing that. So we're going to start off this episode by talking about no-till versus conventional tillage. Many of us know what the advantages of no-till, and it may not be a lot of surprise to people, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things in here that a lot of folks don't know about some of the advantages and disadvantages of the no-till system. So I'm going to share those with you, and I think that's going to be really eye-opening to a lot of people, and I think it's going to be helpful. Let's start off with what is no-till. It's usually done with a no-till drill or a no-till planter. You can no-till about anything. Sometimes it's throw and grow as well, but you can no-till about anything. You can no-till corn, soybeans, grain sorghum, cereal grains. I mean, you name it, you can pretty much no-till everything out there. What no-till is essentially a way of producing food plots where we disturb the soil the very minimal amount that we possibly can. That's essentially no-till. So we're not going in there and we're physically working that soil. We are planting either with a drill, a planter, or we're doing throw and grow that's 100% no-till, and we're getting a stand of food plots. So many folks see a couple guys that are big YouTubers talking about no-till, and I'm not trying to bash anybody, so I'm not going to say any names, but there's a couple guys that really push no-till on everything. And so when I go to a lot of these clients' properties and they say, well, I want to do no-till, and I'm like, okay, why are we going to do no-till here? And so I'm trying to talk and we're trying to figure out what their goals and objectives are. And oftentimes they are trying to build soil in an area where the soil's already built. So there are places in the United States that have very poor soil. There's also parts of the United States that have very, very fertile soil. And so I always question, why are we doing something when I get to a farm? And oftentimes it's because I saw it done on YouTube, right? And so I think after listening to this podcast, I think you'll be able to understand better why we use no-till or why we use tillage in a lot of these systems. That's my goal anyway. So what are some of the advantages of no-till? One of the biggest advantages is it builds soil organic matter. There's no question about that. That's the residue that sits on top of the ground. It builds soil organic matter for sure. And it helps fight erosion. No question about that, right? We work a piece of ground, or you see a piece of farmland that's worked like the picture behind me, and you get a big heavy rain and you will see that water leaving the field rapidly. Well, you don't ever see water leaving the field rapidly in, like I say, a cow pasture, right? Or a CRP field. Why don't you see that? Because a lot of that grass and a lot of that understory, that residue holds that water from running, okay? So it filters down through much easier because it has all that resistance against it, right? It can't just run out of the field like it could in a strictly tillage type of environment where there's no residue on top of the ground. So it also has better soil porosity. So if you think of the soil, you think of little circles all the way through the soil, and this porosity is used for air and it's used for water. So both are needed big time for plants. So the more soil porosity, the better the better those plants are going to be. It also has better water holding capacity, right? Because a no tillage type package has all that residue on top of the ground. So it holds moisture much, much, much better. The sun can't beat down and dry that soil out. So it definitely has some huge advantages to using no-till, but there's also some very, very, very big disadvantages to using no-till, and we'll get to those here in just a few minutes. So what is conventional tillage? That's where we physically go in and work the soil, whether that's with a tiller, a harrow, a disc, a chisel plow, a breaking plow. We're going in there and we're working that soil. And by doing that, we get a much better seed bed, right? Because once we go through and we chisel a field 2 or 3 times and then we disc it 3 or 4 times, we have a very good high quality seed bed that we can get a good consistent depth. It's level, and it's a great seed bed. We also get warmer soils quicker, right? From a tillage side of this, there's a lot of folks that use tillage up north when their growing season is much shorter because they can till that soil and then they can get their ground to drying faster. So very important in parts of the country because of the short growing season, till that residue under and get that sun shining on the soil and drying that soil down. It can also reduce the amount of herbicides that you spray on the soil because of when you're working that soil, that's basically a pass of killing that generation of weeds and grasses. Yes, there's some that are going to come right back, but you've eliminated as one pass of herbicide application. One thing that it also does is it breaks up compaction zones. Now, this is kind of a tricky thing that you really, in my opinion, need to know what you're doing before you try to break up compaction zones, because oftentimes folks can make it worse by tilling than what it already was. But generally what happens is those areas that have a lot of compaction, they don't dry out, they hold a lot of water. You can ever catch them dry, you figure out how low the compaction zone is, and then you can run something down below that. And that will generally break up that compaction zone and help to loosen that soil back up. Like I said, I strongly suggest everybody knows what they're doing before they start messing with that, because you can make that problem worse and compact the soil even worse if you don't know what you're doing. So working soil used to be the norm across the entire U.S. That's because no-till wasn't even invented yet, right? But we know a lot of issues from that. The Great Dust Bowl was part of that. That was a series of droughts working the soil. We lost a lot of soil from wind erosion. Our soil here in western Kentucky is very susceptible to water erosion. So even if we're on say a 2% or less slope, we get a lot of heavy rains. We have a lot of silt in our soil, and silt is really, really bad about washing away. So it really depends on the particles that make up your specific soil type on what is very best for you to have. You have sand, silt, and clay are all the soil particles, and depending upon what you have on your specific farm, you may have a blend of this. You may go mainly no-till with some conventional tillage, or you may be all conventional or all no-till. It just all kind of depends on what you have on your farm. So a big chunk of food plotters have shifted to no-till, which is generally is a great thing. It's more sustainable. It's better in, I feel like 90% of cases, no-till is the way to go. But let's talk about some things that you never hear food plot channels talk about. So this spring and this early summer, most of the U.S. had above average rainfall and below average temperatures. Here in western Kentucky, we are just over 50 inches of rainfall for this year, and I'm filming this video on July 7th. So our annual rainfall is 52 to 55 inches. So we have essentially got an entire year's worth of rain in 7 months. So in the cool temperatures have really joined with those, because we have only got into the 90s about mid-June, which is typically really odd for us because we generally get into the 90s in May. May's generally a pretty warm month for us. We had lots of nights where we were in the 30s and 40s, plus add all this rainfall in. So what does all this have to do with no-till? Why is it relevant? When you get higher rainfall amounts than usual, plus you have lower average soil temperatures and air temperatures, the soil is much slower to warm up in a no-till environment than it is in a conventional tillage environment. So this becomes a very, very big issue, because even you're planting by the calendar date, your soil can still be extremely cold and extremely wet because of all that residue that's sitting on top of the ground. So in 2024, having a very similar year than what we're having in 2025, we had a significant amount of rainfall. We really didn't have the cool weather as much. We were still on the warm side, but we had a tremendous amount of rain. And we had a lot of issues with our soybeans with slugs. And the reason that we were having that slug issue was because we were in a no-till environment. What do slugs need to grow? What do slugs need to thrive? They need cool, wet, dark conditions. The residue on top of the ground from the previous crop was providing a lot of habitat for those slugs. With all the rain and temperatures, they were staying cool and wet, and we were having a lot of issues with slugs. And it was really across the entire state was having a lot of trouble with them. And I suspect they're having some issues with them this year as well, though I've not heard the reports as much this year. So the only thing that you can do to remedy that is to get rid of that environment that those slugs are the only thing that you can do to get rid of those slugs is to get rid of the environment that the slugs thrive in. So by doing that, a lot of the farmers were hooking up disc, they were hooking up turbo tills, they were going in and they were working their soil so that the residue was buried and the slugs didn't have the environment that they needed to thrive in, right? So it killed a lot of them, and all of a sudden now the sun can shine down on the ground a whole lot more, heating things up, drying things out, not really the environment that a slug needs, okay? So that was a remedy for that. So also when you plant into cold, wet soils, the seeds are much more susceptible to fatality before they get a plant established, right? So one year, it's been, time runs together, but 10 or 12 years ago, it seems like, we were planting corn. The conditions were right. The soil temperature was dry. The temperature was mild, and we had the green light, right? The calendar was good. So we went ahead and planted. And a day or two after that, conditions really changed and we shifted to a cold, wet pattern. And so seeds do not like cold and wet. Okay, that is not a good combination for any seed to germ up through. And so as we were digging around, we were finding we got a terrible stand on that corn. And for one thing, what you can do to figure out if your seed is still viable, whether this is corn, soybeans, cereal grains, you name it, you can do this test. You can dig down, find your seed, and then you can smash that seed. And if that seed smashes and pops, that seed is no longer viable. But if that seed, you smash it and it doesn't pop out, that seed was still viable. So that's one good, easy way to tell if your seed is viable or not, is to dig it up and see if it pops. But I had a client reach out, and he's a yearly member of my subscription program. So the way that is he can message or email me questions, and we can try to figure out solutions to the problems that he's having on his farm without me actually going there and visiting the farm. So what he was doing is he had a field of soybeans that he had no-tilled, and he sent me a picture of them, and he was asking, he said, what's wrong with these soybeans? They're not getting the growth that they typically get. Is there anything what am I missing here, right? And so we go through this big, long checklist of inoculant to herbicides to how wet have you been. I mean, this conversation went on and on and on of me asking him questions, trying to figure out and help him with the problem that he's facing. So he sends me pictures of the soybean roots, and the nodules are there from the rhizobia bacteria. I'm like, you're good on that end of things. You know, we asked him about fertilizer and pH, herbicides, and all this, and everything was fine. And so I asked him, you know, what's the environment of the field like? And he's like, it's a no-till field. We're just not getting the growth that we had last year. He had planted some soybeans last year, and they were twice the size they are right now. And so at the conclusion of that, basically that meeting, we decided that the issue likely was a no-till environment with a cold, wet year. You're not going to get the growth that you would on a dry, warm year. Okay, that's just part of it, especially when you have heavy residue on top of the ground. That residue is great, and it's wonderful for soil building. But when in a cold, wet year, it's not ideal to have a ton of residue sitting on top of the soil, because that harbors a lot of fungus and a lot of diseases and a lot of pests that can target your seeds when you're planting into that. So it's a very high likelihood of a lot of those seeds not making it up if you plant in cool, wet conditions, and those conditions continue to persist. So just something that I found interesting this week, talking to some of the clients that we've had, trying to figure out some of these issues. His soybeans still look great. They were no problem. They just didn't have the size that he would like to see on those soybeans, and rightfully so. So he reached out, and we tried to come up with the best solution that we possibly can. And I think it's likely the cold, wet soil, heavy residue, and likely a little bit of slug damage as well, probably all working together against that soybean plant. Okay, let's get to our questions. Question 1, I really enjoy listening to the podcast and watching the YouTube channel. I've seen you talk about putting out mock scrapes. Where are the best places to put them, and when is the best time to put them up? And how do you put them up? It's a great question, and it comes at a good time as well. So I like to have these mock scrapes up about 2 weeks before I think these bucks are going to disperse. That's kind of my minimum time frame back that I want to do. Anything before that, I'm even better with, right? So all my mock scrapes are out right now currently. I will refresh them if they're not getting used some this summer. That's pretty normal for early to mid-summer for those mock scrapes not to be getting hit as hard as they do in late summer, early fall time period. So if you've got mock scrapes out right now and they're not getting just hammered, no worries there. That's pretty normal. So typically our bucks start to disperse to their fall grounds around September 15th. So I like to back up and try to be done late August with all my mock scrapes. I think that is the best way to do it, because you have a 2 to 3 week spell there to get your scent out of that stand, because there is an awful lot of work involved in putting up those mock scrapes, and you will put a lot of scent in that area. So I don't like to do that, say September 30th, because these bucks are going to show up. They may already be there at that point. So I try to do it a little bit before rather than later. And once you get these established, you might have to go in and put a little bit of the Black Widow pre-orbital gland on it every year, but you shouldn't have to redo it every year. But let's talk a little bit more about these mock scrapes. So as soon as that velvet comes off, in Western Kentucky, I've noticed that the bucks will pretty much disperse. So generally, you are pretty safe before September 15th. Yes, you will have a few bucks that will shed a little bit earlier than that, but far and wide, September 15th in our neck of the woods is when most of the bucks will turn from velvet into the hard horns. And generally, within a day or two, they will leave. So I was watching this big group, and we used to do a lot of velvet hunting in western Kentucky at the outfit. And I was watching this big group of velvet bucks. I can't remember if there was 7 or 8 in that batch. And it was like you'd see them, and it was just clockwork, right? It was the most patternable they are all of the entire year is when they're in that velvet. And as soon as that velvet's off, you might get one more day of pictures with them, and then all of a sudden disappear. Right? Then you see another one that's hard horn, next day or two disappear. Now you definitely get, that's not a hard and fast rule. You definitely get some that are hard horn and they'll stay around for a while. But generally when they get hard horn, they turn into a different animal, and they are generally switching to their fall grounds pretty soon after that point. At least starting to move around a whole lot more and get off that consistent pattern that they've been on. So if I'm starting a mock scrape, I want to have that in place by late August to be the very best that it can be. Now, I know the world that we live in is not perfect, right? And it's not perfect for me either. Last year, I found a spot that I thought was a really good spot. It turned out to be a great spot. And so I went ahead and I'm going to put a mock scrape on it. I'm going to put a camera on it. This was late in the year. It's about October 1st. And so I'm like, I think this will be a really good spot. I had enough confidence in it. I went ahead and put a stand, put a camera, I put the mock scrape on it, and October 1st, right? The bucks are already at their fall grounds by then. So I just kind of went in there and just messed everything up. So I thought. I wasn't planning on hunting it that year. All I was going to do is gather some intel from the camera to verify that was a good rutting spot, that was a good rut funnel that I'd set up in there. And so I was working on that farm a couple weeks later. I went back and sure enough pulled the card, and there was all kinds of big bucks using that mock scrape. So with all that being said, get to it when you can. I would rather you get to it earlier rather than later, but if you can't get to it except by October 1st, then put it out October 1st, right? So getting it out there is definitely better than keeping it at the house. So I would strongly advise to go ahead and get it out whenever you can this summer, but if you can't, get it out whenever you can this fall. Where are the best places to put these mock scrapes? I like putting them between bedding area and food. That's probably my favorite. My second favorite is definitely a rut funnel. Man, that's a great spot for a mock scrape. If you find a rut funnel on your farm and you can put a mock scrape in there, that is absolutely dynamite. My third favorite place, which is also extremely exciting, is to match that up with doe bedding. So what I'll do is I'll find a good doe bedding area, a big thicket. Here in western Kentucky, we have a lot of sycamore thickets. I'll be right on the edge of a sycamore thicket and mature timber, and I'll put a mock scrape just on that transition line. And that is just an absolute dynamite spot. All three of those spots, I highly recommend mock scrape. I generally don't have a lot of success hunting over mock scrapes that are in the field. So try to stay away from field edges. Most of that activity is going to be nighttime and not really going to help you nearly as much as those ones that are in the woods, deeper in cover, close to those bedding areas. But one thing that I'll mention before we go on is do not put them too close to that bedding area. Always plan your access of how you're going to hunt that before you put that there. You don't want to be drawing deer to a spot and then not be able to access it. So that's one of the very basic rules of this is set it in a place as close to their beds or on the way to food or in a funnel, but then have a way that you can access that spot and hunt it without boogering it up. You don't want to have to walk through your entire thicket to get through to get to your mock scrape. Another thing to do on these mock scrapes is to be persistent. I have done a pile of these that have had tremendous amount of success, and I've had some that are failures. So if you find a spot you think is going to be a great spot for a mock scrape, put a mock scrape on it. If it doesn't work out, the deer really never take it over, then move it, right? And continue moving it until you find the right spot on your farm. Sometimes it can take some time. Oftentimes, once you kind of figure out what you're looking for, it's going to be a dynamite every time. I mean, the biggest majority of the time now that I have figured out what I'm doing with these mock scrapes, I have instant success with them. Sure, you still have a failure every once in a while, but generally success is very high once you figure out the things that you're looking for and put them in the right spot. If you put these in the right spot at the right height, I'm telling you, you will get a picture of every single deer that's living in that spot on the farm. When it comes from does to fawns to young bucks and big bucks, they will all hit it. And I mean, after hunting this spot last year, it's just unbelievable how many deer literally come to that spot just to look just to hit that mock scrape and then go right back the way they came, right? So it's a big communication tool. It's a big communication hub that these whitetails are using. And so if you don't have these on your farm, you are 100% missing out, in my opinion. But the closer that mock scrape is to a bedding area, the better it is. Or a funnel in the rut. Those are both just dynamite spots for one. I've got another setup where I have a mock scrape where it's leading to a food plot, and I've got these deer funneled down into a spot. There's a trail already there. I made the spot way better by funneling the deer down into it, and I added a mock scrape and a stand location. So anytime that you can force deer through an area and then have a mock scrape there, you're just inviting more deer to use that area, and that's just making that stand location better and better and better. You're giving them more reason to be there. You're not just saying it's all about food here. It's not all about food on this trail anymore. Now it's about communicating and food. So even if he's not hungry, he may want to check that mock scrape. You're going to get a shot at him. Even if he's not worried about communicating, but he's going to get something to eat, you're going to get a shot at him. So the more things that you can pull to that stand location, in my opinion, the better off that you are. So how do we set up mock scrapes? The first thing you do is you find those locations that we were talking about earlier, those funnels, those bedding to food on the outside, the transition zones between bedding and big timber. You find those places, you find a good trail that you want to put that on, and then you find the limb that you want to hang that mock scrape off of. And you basically roughly measure how much you need, and then you go out into the woods and you cut a grapevine that's that length plus 2 or 3 more feet. And the reason that I like to put that 2 or 3 feet is because as that tree grows over time, that limb will get taller and taller. So if we have a little bit more room, we could just move the mock scrape down and keep that grapevine viable for 2 or 3 more years. Where I see a lot of folks make the mistake of they cut the exact height, and then in 2 years, the tree's grown up, and guess what? Now nothing can reach your mock scrape and you have to go cut another one. But I really like using the grapevines. One reason, because they're free and they're pretty plentiful across the United States. We don't have to go out and buy some rope, let it sit outside. We don't have to do all that stuff. This is something that Mother Nature gives for us that whitetails really like to use anyway. So I like using the grapevines. I use about a 1 inch across grapevine is what I found works perfect. Another thing that I kind of dislike about the ropes is I have seen with my own 2 eyes on a trail camera that my buddy has. He runs ropes. Nothing wrong with running ropes if that's what you want to do, but I saw a buck get tangled, his antlers get tangled up in a rope, and he yanked the whole thing down. I don't want to go in there mid-October because my scrape is just got ripped down and try to fix all that, put all my human scent in there, but I also want my scrape there. So it would be a tough situation to be in to have that happen to you, but I have not had that issue at all with grapevines. I don't see any way that grapevine could get wrapped around that antler, because the grapevines that I use are pretty rigid and they really don't bend a whole lot to the point to where they could wrap around that antler. So what I do is I get up on a ladder and I hang that grapevine from the limb, and I use heavy duty zip ties or I use metal wiring, something that's going to stand the test of time. You don't want to go to the Dollar General. I like the Dollar General, but you don't want to go to the Dollar General and get the cheapo zip ties for this project right here. Save that for another project. You want high quality zip ties that are heavy tested, that will stand the test of time outside. So once again, you don't want to have to go in there mid-October because your scrape fell down because your cheap zip ties broke. So get heavy duty zip ties or use metal wiring to wire these up. In the summer, I like to put them right below my waistline. That's where I like to put them. As fall approaches and those leaves fall and the winter comes, those branches will raise up a little bit. So I've seen a lot of folks make that mistake of putting it too high in the summertime, and then in the wintertime, maybe only the bucks can use it because they get up on their back 2 legs. Well, if only the bucks are using it, you're missing a lot of the drawl of that scrape anyway, because you want those fawns and you want those does using it as well. So do not put it too high. I like to use a little Black Widow preorbital scent gland, and it's a gel. I just put a little bit on to get it started for the year, and then I leave it alone. Generally, a deer will come up to that within 24 hours, smell it. They will start rubbing that gland, their forehead gland, all over that, and all of a sudden, every deer in that part of the woods will start to use it, from little does, fawns, big does, small bucks, and big bucks. Every one of them will use it. It's a really amazing draw, to be honest with you. Okay, question number 2. I saw one of your videos on soybeans and sunflowers. Is it too late to plant them this year, or am I better off to wait until next spring? The sunflowers need about 90 days to mature. So what I would recommend to do, instead of trying to figure this out for everybody in the United States, look up your average first frost date and count back 90 days. Do you have time or not? In my part of the world, Western Kentucky, I don't think it would be ideal right now, but it wouldn't scare me to do it. And the reason it wouldn't scare me is because what do you got to lose? Sunflowers are really cheap, and you are fulfilling a huge need, in my opinion, because we all know that as summer progresses, protein and digestibility drop dramatically. That's well proven throughout the whitetail world, that as you progress through summer, protein levels, digestibility levels drop significantly. So in my opinion, even if it doesn't make seed, you've still provided high quality protein for whitetails that are looking for high quality protein during the late summer, early fall period. In the same way with soybeans, the soybeans are a little bit trickier because they have different maturities. So a soybean has group 0 through group 7. I don't think I've ever seen any over a group 7. I don't know if they make them and I've just not seen them, or all I've seen is group 7s are the highest I've ever seen. So a group 1 is going to mature really, really fast. So a lot of the folks in, say, like Minnesota would use maybe a 0.8 or a 1.0 soybean because their growing season is super short. Somebody in southern Alabama or Georgia might use a 6.5 or a 7.0 because their growing season is very, very, very long. Here in Kentucky, we use a group 4 all the way down to maybe a low 5. So if I was going to plant soybeans right now, what I would do is I would back up and get a little bit lower of a number. So like I said, 4s and low 5s for us. Well, then I would just jump up a couple zones on that map and maybe go to a 2.5 or a 3.0, something that's going to mature very quickly if I was worried about yield. Now, there's no question about it. You planting this late in the year, July 7th, you are going to lose some yield because of your late planting. That's just all there is to it. There's no way around that. But like I said with the sunflowers, what's the worst thing you got to lose? If you're worried about giving your whitetails the high quality protein that they need, these are great plots to put out on your farm in the late summer, regardless of whether they make seed or not. Doesn't make any difference to me because you're providing protein for your whitetails to finish up that growing season. And the reason that I got that question was a video that I put on YouTube last week where I showed my soybeans and my sunflowers, and I showed how good those sunflowers are at shading the ground and making the canopy, essentially, is what they're doing. So they are blocking that sunlight from hitting the ground, so where the new weeds and grasses are not germing up, where soybeans and cowpeas and lab aren't really very good at making canopy, to be honest, because generally those are going to have to get knee to waist high before they really form a dense canopy, where a field of sunflowers gets there much, much faster. By the time they're knee high, they've got pretty much full canopy, and they're blocking that sun from germing any seeds that are growing below those sunflowers. Question number 3. I am new to deer hunting and came across your YouTube page. Great information. I'm wanting to get a stand, but I have no idea where to start. Should I get a ladder stand, a lock-on, or try one of the saddles? What are the pros and cons to each? That's a great question, and I'm glad to have a new hunter joining us on the channel. So this is something that I would definitely could see be a daunting task to go through if you didn't have anybody to follow along. Like a dad or a granddad that hunted and you were just getting into it, this could be a major issue. I could definitely see this. One extremely important note to mention before I answer this question is to please make sure you understand the safety equipment that we have nowadays, whether it's a lineman's belt, whether it's a lifeline safety rope, and a safety harness. Make sure you use those, and you're familiar with those, and you know how to use those in a safe manner. There's way too many people that get hurt or killed getting in and out of deer stands, or while they're hunting, they fall asleep, whatever the situation is, because they don't have their safety gear on. So please make sure and familiarize yourself with the safety equipment before you do anything with a ladder stand or a lock on or a saddle. So ladder stands are probably the most popular for beginning deer hunters all the way through very experienced deer hunters. They are probably what I see the most on the consulting visits, and for good reason, right? A well-built ladder stand with a shooting rail is a great choice, especially for rifle hunters. One big downside of a ladder stand for bow hunters is they can get in the way a little bit, that shooting rail. And another thing is that ladder stands are difficult to move by yourself. So it's not something that can't be done, but it's very difficult to move a ladder stand by yourself nowadays. A lot of these stands are built very heavy, very strong, and they are extremely difficult to be mobile with these and to move around in your woods. One of the other things that I really dislike about ladder stands is the height to cover. And so a lot of times you will be looking at a tree and you'll think, oh, that cover right there is perfect. You set the tree up and you get up there in it, and then you notice, oh man, I'm like 2 feet short of the cover, or 3 feet short of the cover, and you stick out like a sore thumb. That's one big disadvantage of a ladder stand, in my opinion, is you can't get to where the cover is. You are 17, 18, or 20 feet, whatever the height of that stand is. That's where you're going to be. And I like to have cover around me, especially when I'm bow hunting. If I'm rifle hunting, it's not as big a deal because the deer don't have to be as close. But when I'm bow hunting and the deer have to be close, I really want to be in cover and blended in pretty good with that environment. I prefer lock-ons. They are, in my opinion, the safest to use, and they are the best to deal with what I just talked about with that height to cover. If I have cover at 25 feet, I can go to 25 feet. If I have cover at 13 feet, I can go to 13 feet. So I use lock-ons exclusively on my farm. That's my favorite type of stand to use. I think they are very not noticeable. I think there are times when that ladder stand kind of gives your location away, especially to other hunters, but I think to the deer as well. I like being in a stand where there's nothing below you, that it looks like, a stairway going right to your stand where the deer are looking up. So I like lock-ons, and in my opinion, if you know how to use the safety equipment and you know how to use your safety harness and your lineman's belt and your safety rope, I don't think there's anything safer than a lock-on. I use those exclusively, and all my clients that come to the property must use those as well. I think that's a very, very good thing to do, is to have that lock-on with your safety rope and to have that lineman's belt on there. So when you're hanging the actual stand, you have your lineman's belt, and then once you actually get the stand hung, you have your safety rope installed so that you are on that prusik knot from the time you leave all the way up until the time that you get to that ladder stand. You are tied into that stand, and you cannot fall, or you can fall, but you're not supposed to fall to the ground. That knot should tighten up, and you should not fall. So make sure you're using the right safety equipment. I know I've said that like twice, 2 or 3 times now, but it's very important. Saddles, I don't have a tremendous experience with saddles. I know a lot of guys that have used them. They've never really appealed to me a whole lot. It's probably one of those things I've just kind of set in my ways, and if I ever use one, they would be what I go to. But with my farm, I prefer lock-ons more than anything because they're highly mobile and they're safe, and I like to have that feel underneath me, and I don't want to be hanging by a rope. I know they're safe for a lot of folks, but I just prefer to sit in comfort in my Millennium lock-on stands and be good and happy up there doing so. But that is another real thing. Like if you have a farm that you may not have permission on for very long, or if you're like hunting public land, you have 7 or 8 spots that you have found that you want to hunt in. And instead of having to buy 7 or 8 different lock-ons and 7 or 8 different sets of sticks or steps to get to those lock-ons, you can have one saddle and hunt all those places with one set of sticks. So if money is an issue, then the saddle is likely going to be the cheapest option if you have multiple options on that farm that you're going to be hunting. So any of them are good, and I think there's a place for all of them on all the farms depending on your specific setup. Question number 4. I've never seen corn get eaten before it makes an ear. However, this year my corn food plot is getting demolished by deer well before the ear stage. What gives? So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. This has been happening in Western Kentucky for a number of years. I mean, I can't remember exactly when it started, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. We started seeing a significant amount of deer that were eating corn during the summertime. We first didn't even know what it was. And it was really rare because generally deer do not eat corn. Or that's what we always thought, and they never did for a long time. They would find a soybean field and they would demolish that soybean field, but the cornfield they generally left alone. But a few years ago, that really switched, and the deer were eating a whole lot of corn, or so it appears. And we're going to talk about that more in just a second. But they were going through and maybe knocking out a 3-acre nook. Or, I've seen some huge places that the deer just absolutely wiped out. It looked like a 15-foot batwing bush hog just mowed it down. So they can do a significant amount of damage. I don't think it's taking up a huge percentage of that whitetails diet, and I'm going to tell you why. Generally, what we find through video footage of the cell cameras and just seeing this in person, generally what happens is the whitetail doesn't start at the top of the plant and eat it all the way down like you would expect them to on like soybeans. Generally, what they do is they'll take a bite 5 or 6 inches from the bottom of the plant, and they'll just bite the whole plant off. The plant will fall and they'll eat that little section that they chewed out, and they'll go to the next plant. So it's not like they're eating the entire corn stalk down as so much as they're just taking a bite of it, and the rest of it's kind of going to waste. Now, a lot of times that does end up killing that plant or making it severely stunted. But I don't think it's a huge chunk of their diet because of the way they eat it. They don't eat it like a soybean, to where if you think of a bush, the soybean's going to be putting on the most protein-packed and digestible food at the outside. So that's what the whitetails will eat first before they'll eat those huge big leaves on the very bottom. They'll eat all the little ones that are growing on the edges because that's the high protein, high food sources. They don't really do that with corn. They eat the very bottom of the plant. And so one thing that, a theory that really got proved wrong a couple years ago by me, when I first started seeing this, I thought, okay, maybe it's something to do with drought, because we were in a drought period when these deer were chewing that corn and knocking it down like that. And so I thought, well, maybe this is they're getting moisture. The moisture's not falling from rain, and a lot of the plants don't have the moisture content because we're in such a drought. Corn has very deep roots. It's still getting moisture. So maybe they're biting it off and getting that, that liquid out of that corn plant. But that's definitely not the case this year in Western Kentucky. We have water puddles everywhere. It just rained again tonight. And so there's no way that that's the case this year, but yet they're still doing it. So it's definitely not what it is. My best guess is it has something to do with sugar, and that is a sweet taste down there at the bottom of that plant, where a lot of those nutrients are being uptook. That's why we're doing these trials. That's one big reason that we're doing these trials, is I want to figure out what's causing deer to eat this plant and not this plant. What's causing a deer to bite this plant off 6 inches from the ground and drop, and then move on to the next one, do the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get a sample and cut this off of a plant just like a deer would, and I'm going to send that particular sample, not the entire plant, just where they would bite it off. I'm going to send that to the lab and test that against the samples that I sent of the entire plant, and we're going to find out if there's anything different down there than there is throughout the entire plant. Something that may be making those whitetails eat that. So definitely follow up on the YouTube channel, and I'll talk about it on the podcast too, but definitely follow up on the YouTube channel and figure out, and we will see if we can figure out exactly what's causing this. Thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of Whitetails and Agronomy podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, y'all keep on food plotting. God bless everybody.